Well, when you think about military standards and acquisition reform, I think it's important to recognize that we've been doing acquisition reform for now 50 years. And I think it offers a question about what we really are trying to do with acquisition reform. I know many in the department, many on the Hill, many of our defense contractors feel beset with waves of acquisition reform that have not met their intended goals. It seems that every few years we change our processes and don't necessarily get a better outcome. But the wave of acquisition reform that I believe that you're referring to here is the one that occurred kind of from 94 to 2000. This would be the post-Packard Commission efforts that were led by Perry and others. And those included an effort to look at specs and standards. At the time, there was a significant consideration that military specifications, that military standards were driving cost into the systems that the department was procuring. And I think that may have been true at the time, but also what was really at the root, I think, of the cost impact of standards, and I think is an issue even today, is overspecification. Utilizing standards that were not required to accomplish the goal, calling out standards that imposed costly requirements but were not needed for the product itself. And I think in general, a concern that comes to this day is the real need for folks to apply good engineering judgment to the application of specifications and standards, not simply picking up something from the shelf and applying it without careful consideration of cost and benefit. Back during my time as Defense Standards Executive, I was concerned that some of the efforts we had undertaken to disestablish military standards, and hundreds of military standards were disestablished during the acquisition reform phase, had in fact thrown away institutional knowledge, key understandings of the way that component systems, processes work that had been earned at great cost over time with the application of many years and many smart folks that have been codified in standards, and the desire to eliminate the curse of overspecification had encouraged us to toss out critical knowledge that could be applied successfully in current systems. And so we built a process, we reinvigorated at the time the Defense Standardization Council, and we asked them to go back and look at cost benefit, to ask whether there were standards that had been eliminated by this process, by the desire to kind of clean house that occurred during the acquisition reform era, that perhaps we had eliminated in error. And we could see it happening when you looked at engineering documentation on critical programs. You could see that people were still referencing standards that had been canceled, that were no longer active, were no longer being maintained. And the reason people were still referencing these standards is because they needed to reference something. They needed the content that were in these documents, and just because a bureaucratic process had eliminated them, they still needed to find something to help get the engineering work done. And so we asked the DSE to go back and look and ask, were there parts of standards or key documents that had been eliminated during the purge, if you will, that occurred during acquisition reform that would still be of value to the department, that needed to be re-engaged in some way, maintained, supported. At least the intent of those documents could be maintained and supported. And one of those was, in fact, documents that were focused on understanding human effects, understanding how humans interacted with military systems, whether those were documents that help people understand how to shape the seat in a cockpit to match the size of an individual, whether it addressed the ability for individuals of different sizes and shapes to be able to reach controls in a combat environment. Those kind of things were still critically necessary, but we had eliminated some of the tools that the department had to help specify those. I think that's, again, an example of how we use specs and standards smartly. We can't count on these things to be recipes or scripts that we can just take off and apply, but they should be thought about as engineering tools, as documents that capture knowledge, that communicate from one generation to the next about how things can be done effectively and efficiently, that communicate between suppliers and the department about our expectations for the performance of products, and that allow us to use these documents as an engineering tool. Every engineering tool can cause harm if misapplied, but engineering tools can also help increase efficiency and effectiveness if applied smartly. And so the conversation we're having back in that era in the defense standardization community was, how could we think about the right application of standards, the efficient application of standards, rather than kind of a rote argument that standards are bad or specifications are bad. And I think that we've been successful in kind of reshaping the conversation around the value of technical documentation.